Well, first of all, yeah, it was a Smoky Mountain show. Erlanger, Kentucky is like a suburb of Cincinnati. So I'm trying to think of it like Newark. It's Cincinnati's Newark, New Jersey. If Cincinnati was New York, okay, so that's where we're at. It wasn't like it was in the middle of the fucking woods somewhere.
Right.
Um, and the reason what Dennis Corluzzo had gotten heavily involved in the NWA, and Les Thatcher, who was doing Smoky Mountain Wrestling television commentary, lived in Cincinnati and had some connections with the building there and the local TV station. We got the show on, and we were trying to develop it as a market, but we ran a few shows, and for a variety of reasons, it didn't pan out. But when Paul Heyman, which was one of the things that led to mine and Paul's problems in the 90s, when Paul screwed Dennis and the NWA and had Shane Douglas throw the belt down, and which was irresponsible and unprofessional. And I'm not going to start everything with Shane over it, but just the whole incident left a bad taste in my mouth. I helped Dennis with another tournament for the NWA Championship and sent talent up to his show to have that tournament. And Candido won it because Candido was not only one of his guys, was one of my guys and was a great young talent. And funny story real quick, Candido was in an airport and accidentally ran into Lou Thez while he was the NWA champion.
Oh.
And Chris went up and it was like, Mr. Thez, it's such an honor to meet you, sir. And I work for Jim Cornette, and I'm currently the champion for the NWA, trying as unassuming as he possibly could. He's telling Lou Thez he's the NWA world champion, right? And he came back and he told me about the conversation. He said Lou was really nice to him and put him over on his look and everything, and just said, watch out, guy. When you go into some of these territories, somebody's going to try to double cross you. Like that was still going to be an option anymore. Somebody's going to double cross him in the ring, right?
Right.
Maybe Lou knew that Heyman was involved. The double crosses with Heyman are never in the ring. They're always in the back. But anyway, so Chris held the title, and then they wanted to switch it to Dan because Dan has started training in pro wrestling. And obviously was a huge name with the international amateur wrestling community. He's the most decorated amateur wrestler that the United States has ever produced, over 100 national, regional, and local championships. Plus, he had gotten involved in the early years of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, where he would go on to be the first UFC Triple Crown winner, the Super Fight, back when they did the tournaments, and et cetera, and literally a legend. So obviously, Chris had no problem dropping the belt, and Dennis asked if I could make the arrangements to have it on one of my shows. And so that's what we did. And Dan is always, and to this day, remains a pleasure to work with. And he did not cut any promos. Dan's not a promo guy. He'll admit it. Dan happens to be one of the baddest motherfuckers that ever stepped foot in a fucking wrestling ring or a wrestling mat or a UFC octagon, but he wasn't a great promo. So we didn't try to accentuate his weaknesses. We accentuated his strengths. And he worked for us several times. He was on the Super Bowl of Champions that year in Knoxville when I had championships from 5 different organizations defended. And obviously that was actually the start of my problems with Mr. Russo. Not the start, but one of the biggest issues was when the WWF managed to sign Dan Severn. They had Dan Severn and Ken Shamrock in the same company at the same time. They had each won a fight in the UFC that were over 100,000 buys in the UFC's infancy, and had really put the sport on the map on pay-per-view. And we had the opportunity to have the third match under our control in the WWF. And I wrote for Vince McMahon and Vince Russo 10 pages of notes on Dan Severn's strengths and his weaknesses, and how you promote him and how you don't promote him, and what he should do and can do and what he can't do and shouldn't do. And they disregarded all of it and neutralized Dan Severn's potential drawing power. Never had the match between him and Shamrock, at least on pay-per-view, to my knowledge. Russo was more concerned with fucking making Sable a star and, pushing people that painted themselves blue and wore funny outfits instead of one of the most recognized, legitimate, real athletes the United States has ever had, Dan Severn. So once again, it's another reason why he's a complete idiot. They lost their chance. I've never been able to stomach the way he looks at wrestling. And Dan, it remains a pleasure. And when I brought him to Ring of Honor to corner Eddie Edwards against Davey Richards in their world title match in New York a few years ago, the original idea was to have Shamrock in Davey's corner and have Severn in Eddie's corner. And Ken had expressed interest when I talked to him specifically, but I had to go through his manager, who took so long getting back to me and didn't seem like he was into Ken doing the project, that we weren't able to put that together. But still, for a lot of the Ring of Honor fans who apparently, much like Bill Watts said about me one time, if they were ever to be caught in a men's locker room, they'd be whistling Stranger in Paradise. They didn't understand the value of having somebody like Dan Severn, not only in your locker room, not only giving a talk to the talent, not only being advertised on a card, but also because this was internet pay-per-view. And Dan Severn had just 2 decades before that was on the forefront of putting UFC on the map on pay-per-view. So why wouldn't we get a little rub? And why wouldn't our guys get a little rub? And why wouldn't Dan doing me a favor and working for much less than he probably worked for anybody else for, to give some credibility to the organization, be a problem? Because for some reason, the existing Ring of Honor fans would rather see fucking fake luchadors and fat fucking guys in bike shorts with scruffy beards playing pro wrestler instead of somebody who's actually competed in athletics and a variety of combat sports at a high level.
That's something I don't understand.
Never been able to explain that.
That's something I don't understand. I mean, and I imagine a lot of people don't understand. But when I first started watching wrestling, the vibe I always got was that there was a huge respect for the elders and legends, even if they weren't on, in the best of shape, or maybe not, we're not presenting themselves super well, Ric Flair, and but despite that, they'd still be on your TV, they'd still be given a place because they had earned it.
Yeah,
it seems like that's changing up to a certain extent, at least outside of the WWE. The WWE does still at least sort of make an effort to have people on. I don't understand why, though. Why not with WWE. I don't understand why, say, another promotion would be reticent to have legends on. Do they not have the same kind of respect, or is the mentality entirely different in different promotions?
Well, part of the problem is Dan Severn. I wouldn't call him a legend in pro wrestling, because he dabbled in pro wrestling, but his legendary status comes from amateur wrestling, mixed martial arts, the UFC, but it all fits in together. It's all about selling tickets to a sport where people fight. They either fight for real or they fight for fun, but they're fighting. And it's a chance to have somebody who was a mainstream name and has gotten legitimate press coverage. He lent credibility and respect to our product. And it's saying, when I took Eddie Edwards up to Michigan to Dan's camp to work out, there's Dan Severn at the time. I think he was 52 at that point, and not only blowing Eddie Edwards up and stretching him and showing him things, but he's got 5 or 6 training partners and tackling dummies, and he's going through them without even breaking a sweat, and they're half his age. And Eddie was like a kid in a candy store, because he was learning all kinds of shit. It was like the next best thing to going to Wigan, to the snake pit for some of these guys. And he appreciated it, but the Ring of Honor fans were up in arms. Well, who wants to see Dan Severn? Well, blah, blah, blah. He can't cut a promo. What the fuck? So I was embarrassed, actually, at some of the press that Dan got when he was trying to do the company and me and the talent a favor. And so that's one of the reasons why I stopped asking so many of my friends to do favors for me in Ring of Honor, because it wasn't doing anybody any good. Either Sinclair Broadcasting disrespected them, or the goddamn minute core of old-time Ring of Honor fans that didn't see anything want to change, such as the company actually making a profit, they would disrespect them. And it got old real quick with me.